Okay, we went to this place. There's this guy who has this car in the middle of Ohio. Okay, we need a place to film it. Well, let's get on Google Maps and start looking.
Yeah, because we've never been there before.
The Last Independent Automaker Podcast was sponsored in part by Visit Detroit, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Motor City's National Heritage Area, and by the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to this project. Thank you.
Hello and welcome back to the Last Independent Automaker Podcast. I'm producer-director Joe Ligo, joined by my co-producer Jim Needle. And we're going to have a fun time today because we are talking about the technical side of things, which when I started this project, I was like, I need somebody who knows more about cameras and editing and equipment than me. And so I called you. And I think it's because I was fresh out of college and I think I had a lot of doubts in my ability and stuff. I felt like there were a lot of gaps in my knowledge. And so you were the guy.
All right, well, good. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. The one thing from a technical side that stands out to me that I think about all the time is just that we really didn't have any major mishaps. Like there wasn't a hard drive that went down that destroyed us. There wasn't some missing footage. There was just no major incident. Because I think we were smart and followed a path and a setup. And we talked about it all the time. Like, how are we going to do this? Like, how are we going to set this up? And we did it, and it kind of just worked out. So I was pretty pleased with that.
Yeah, I mean, I was a few years out of college. You were, further along than me in your career. You had a graduate degree. You'd worked in, professional environments. But yes, it still felt like we were kind of making it up as we went. I mean, I watched a lot of TV and documentaries, and I could pick out things I liked, but I couldn't figure out how are they doing that. And so we kind of invented figuring out what camera to use, what editing software to use, what computer equipment, how we would store the footage. And I think that's a really good point. The fact that we can look back on this documentary now and say there were no major malfunctions, I think it's a testament to how hard you and I worked as a team to check and double check our technical stuff every step of the way. I had all of our footage backed up in triplicate. I had a copy at my house, a copy at your house, and a copy in a third secret place so that if both of our houses burned down overnight, we'd still have a copy of the documentary. People talk about like, oh, if your house burns down, what would be the one thing you would save? Your pet, your photo album. I'd save my hard drives. But thankfully I didn't have to do that because I had hard drives in other locations. And, you helped a lot with the camera equipment and that kind of thing. And so I think this podcast, I want to talk about the technical side, how we filmed this documentary.
Yeah, it's like kind of a lost art form to a certain degree, at least on YouTube, as far as interviews go. And I even see like in other documentaries, they really stick to key individuals to carry the story along, and they don't have the 40 so or whatever interviews that we obtained. And so it's just kind of interesting over that time because it's expensive. It's expensive to go to people, to find people, to set them up, to have the entire crew there to film it all. So I think that's one of the things that we should also be really proud about is just the effort that went into finding the people and filming them and making them look good.
That's a great point. We're going to talk more about that later with our co-producer, Pat, talking about some of the fun interviews we did, some of the exciting people we got to meet, and some of the help we got along the way. So let's stick on the technical stuff for now, right? Every interview we did meant we had to either go to that person or they had to come to us. This was when we started, it was pre-COVID, and the idea of, FedExing somebody an iPad so they could do a Zoom interview wasn't anything we were going to do. And so that meant we had to go there. And one of the many reasons why I wanted you to be my co-producer is because at the time, you were the only person I knew that owned a 4K camera. And, for our non-technical audience members, screen size is measured in resolution. And, you have standard definition, high definition, which is sometimes called 1080. So you have, 480 is the standard def TV, like an old tube TV. And then you have 720 and then 1080, which is like a big widescreen TV. And then sometime in the 2000s, a format called 4K was invented because it's 4,000 pixels by whatever 1,000 pixels. And that was kind of when we started this project in 2016, 2015. 4K was cutting edge. It was said that this was the prettiest format, the highest resolution. Things looked really good in 4K. And I knew that this project was going to take us a while. And so I couldn't just pick up any old, high definition camera that I'd been using since college to film it on. I wanted something in 4K. And at the time, you were the only person I knew who owned a 4K camera. And of course, now you can buy an iPhone that shoots in 4K. But that wasn't the case in 2015.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, and even then, like I don't even have that camera anymore that we started with, but it was a red Scarlet camera, which basically is what they used to make movies with. It was maybe the lower version of the standard for movie making at the time.
Yeah.
I had it just as a competitive advantage for my career and to make content for clients, and it really it helped out. It helped us out, and I kind of miss not having it still as like kind of a legacy thing, because there's always some interesting thing with the look of each camera has their own individual look. But I think I made the right decision on moving on from it. But it definitely was very useful for us.
Yeah, at the time, Red, that's the brand name, like this is a Canon. Red is a brand name, and yeah, the Red Scarlet was one of the lower priced Reds, but I mean, they were cutting edge stuff. Hollywood movie guys were transitioning from shooting on physical film to shooting on Red, and so that was really exciting. It's like, well, Jim's got a Red, let's go film on it. And yeah, so we started out shooting on that. And the first thing we filmed were interviews, because you and I had this conversation and we talked about it in another podcast, which was we knew that the people who worked at American Motors weren't going to be around forever. And somebody had to get their stories before it was too late, before they were no longer with us. And so we said, we're going to go interview as many AMC people as we can. We're going to film it in 4K. And from there, then we'll figure out how to raise the money needed to finish the documentary. We'll figure out how to get a contract signed to get it on some kind of TV or streaming service. We'll figure out what other stuff we need. But let's start with the interviews. So that's kind of a backwards process that, not a lot of filmmakers use that process. But my goal was to get these people before they passed away. And we're very fortunate that, sadly, some of the folks we interviewed have passed away, but we still have those memories because we prioritized interviews first. And, our interview process evolved, but your standard kind of basic TV interview, it's one camera, some lights, some sound equipment. What was our setup like?
Yeah, it was basic but repeatable. I mean, we used this old gray backdrop that I found at the studio that I worked at, that I don't remember, I think maybe you had it for a while, or you would come back whenever I couldn't go with you and you would grab it. I remember one time I just set it outside of the studio doors because I was out of town and we didn't really care about it, and it was protected, but I just left it sit out there so you can get it one time.
It was like a cardboard backdrop or a paperboard backdrop. And then we had a couple different LED lights, which again, at the time was revolutionary. I mean, in 2017, not everybody had switched over to LED lighting yet for filming stuff. So we had LED lights that were battery powered and could be plugged in. That was pretty cutting edge. And, the 4K camera, I mean, we begged, borrow, and we didn't steal, but we begged and borrowed as much equipment as we could, because you owned the camera, but we needed to borrow other stuff from friends to get what we needed to film these interviews.
It's like we needed something that was simple that we could replicate. That if I wasn't there, that if Joe wasn't there, that looked the same every time. Now, ultimately, we were able to find different shooting locations, and we were more flexible with that. But that was our initial thought, to keep costs down, at least before we had that path of knowing that we were going to be able to somehow find funding, and how we were going to get this done. And so I think for us initially up front, it was like, how do we come up with a lighting package, camera package, background package that will be consistent, that we know that we can get anytime we need it.
Yeah, and so that was a big thing, consistency. We wanted the interviews to look the same, or at least close to the same, so that they weren't wildly different from person to person to person to person, so that, that helps the viewer stay focused when all the interviews kind of go together, versus like, whoa, that guy's skin looks like green and they're filming him at like nighttime in like an empty parking lot, versus like, that guy's sitting in front of a fireplace. So we tried to keep a consistent look across camera and the equipment and the lighting. And yeah, we did a lot of bulk interviews in 2017. Our first big interview session was in Detroit in the basement of Vince Geraci's house. Vince, the former AMC stylist. And Pat's going to talk a little bit about that later because Vince, we have some funny stories from Vince's. So we'll save that for later. But basically, right, we kind of started to get a feel for things. And then later that same summer, you and I went to Kenosha, and we decided we didn't need the backdrop anymore because we had a cool location. The Kenosha History Center had all these cars parked in their inside museum. So then we started to use that space. And then we started to experiment more with future interviews. We did one interview that was in a garage, but the garage door was open and we got some like natural sunlight coming in. And then we did eventually do one interview in a guy's living room in front of a fireplace. And we started to experiment kind of over time and allow a little more character into our interviews, but they still have a consistent look all the way across. And that's pretty impressive, even considering we switched cameras halfway through. I forget, was like around 2019, 2020, you traded your Soldier Red.
Yeah, it was probably 2020, sometime in 2020, mid 2020, because I was living in Sioux Falls at that time, which was also another whole story that probably affected the production. But yeah,
Yeah,
it was
COVID put the brakes on
yeah,
everything, and then you ended up having to move, and then we still managed to get it done. But yeah, there were a few years there where we were halfway across the country from each other.
yeah.
But we pulled it off. We switched to a new camera. You switched to a new camera. You sold the Red and bought a new camera called a Blackmagic. Was it Blackmagic Pocket Cinema?
Yeah. Pocket Cinema 6K.
So we went from 4K to 6K, which was a little bit overkill in some cases. We realized very quickly that shooting in 6K filled up hard drives very fast. And so we had to be careful about how we shot things and also how long our interviews went because we'd fill up hard drives too fast. But through that, we shot interviews in, I think we did a count last time. How many states did we go to? I mean, if you think, Wisconsin, Illinois, I think we did one. Well, we shot cars in Indiana. We shot an interview in Ohio. I believe we filmed cars in Pennsylvania.
Right.
We filmed
Maryland,
interviews in Connecticut, cars in Maryland.
New York.
Last time we did a count, New York. Right. I think it was close to 10 states if you count cars and interviews. I think we filmed in 10 different states or close to that. Maybe it was 9. I forget. But anyways, yes. I mean, we traveled from Connecticut to Kenosha and back, which is not in one go, but across the course of several years, we hit a bunch of different states to film things. So interviews were fun to film, but I think the really exciting thing to film for me is cars. I mean, I love talking to people. I love hearing stories, but to film an interview, it's a lot of rush to get all the equipment set up, and then it's a lot of sitting and focusing. Cars, we're outside. It's a totally different kind of ball game.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of the opposite as you. I think I always prefer interviews rather than shooting like B-roll or cars. But yeah, it's a completely different ballgame for sure. You have to do it whenever the sun's right, or you have to find the angles where the sun's right. You have to take the car where the sun's right. It's probably the biggest one. And then you have very particular taste as far as what kind of roads you like to drive on for them.
And we talked about this, Doug Gerke and I, in the last podcast. He mentioned that, we filmed Doug Gerke. We filmed a lot of his AMCs in Indiana where he lives. And both of us, you and me, are Pennsylvania boys. We're used to bridges and curves and hills and turns. And then we went out to Indiana to film cars and everything's flat and all the roads are grids. I mean, even in rural areas, all the roads are grids. And we did more than just film the cars driving. We had basically 4 things we needed from each car: interiors, exteriors, drive-bys, and GoPros. And GoPros are the cameras here. I've got, the little action cameras that, exploded in popularity during the 2000s and the 2010s, the little cameras that you can stick on a vehicle so you can see the wheels turning, the suspension as it goes over bumps. You get to see the driver, behind the wheel or whatever. And so I felt like the best way to tell the story was to have those 4 kinds of footage, because you're going to talk about the car styling. That's the exterior. You're going to talk about what it's like inside the car. That's the interior. Then you're going to talk about, what's important about this car, and you want to see it driving. You want to see it going fast. If it's a sports car, you want to see it going fast, or, maybe not if it's a Gremlin. But And then GoPros, I think, add a nice combination so you can cut between shots of the car driving and then shots of the GoPro on it as it drives. It creates a nice mix. But we had to do that for, I don't know, 12 cars, 15 cars, 20 cars. I don't even remember the final count. But that takes a long time. I mean, to do interiors and exteriors alone is several hours, and then drive-bys can be heavily affected by trying to find the right kind of roads. If you remember the first cars we did drive-bys for, the two Ramblers, the yellow Rambler from I think 51 or 50, and then the pink Rambler from 56, 57, both of those cars, we had to do a lot of searching to find a road that actually worked.
Yeah, we had to go, out to the country. We were kind of in a small town, and the owners of it knew of a kind of interesting older vibe ice cream shop slash farm. And so, yeah, we ended up out there, and that had the perfect kind of vibe for many shots. And it was kind of a cool location.
And one of the best parts about that area, aside from the vintage ice cream place, which was really neat, was that it was a very lonely road that was not very busy. And that's one thing that the viewer doesn't see, is that anytime another vehicle gets in the shot, it ruins the shot. It's a distraction. And so, you don't want to be talking about a 1956 Rambler and then see like a 2014 Chevy Silverado coming the other way. And so we had to work really hard to find nice places to shoot. And that often meant going where the cars were. Like we were on the lam. We had to figure it out on our feet on the fly. Okay, we went to this place. There's this guy who has this car in the middle of Ohio. Okay, we need a place to film it. Well, let's get on Google Maps and start looking.
Yeah, because we've never been there before.
Right. Like I filmed that Renault Alliance. I filmed it in Dayton, Ohio. I've never been to Dayton until then. And it just so happened that one of the guys said, oh, well, there's a really nice city park down this way. And we go, and there's this giant statue, has a very kind of French influence, a very sort of Parisian vibe to it. We pull the Renault Alliance up in front of it and film it, and it looks like we're in Paris.
No, it's awesome.
It's this great kind of just luck of the draw.
Yeah.
The Matador we filmed at some state park in Michigan, and it just so happened there was a sailboat on the water as we were filming it. Luck of the draw, The Jeep we filmed, that it just so happened there was a local AMC club member who owned a farm that let us drive it into the woods on his property to film. Again, just really lucky. It just so happened to be in that location that we were able to make those connections. So, yeah, that is very much, when I look back at our team, I think we're very blessed at how some of our vehicle shoots turned out. Not only because of the generosity of the owners, but just the luck we had finding cool places to film.
For sure. Yeah, everybody was so helpful and just wanted to make this successful.
I don't want to talk too much about money, but the cost of the technology has come down so much. Cameras, the Blackmagic camera was probably half as expensive as your Red camera.
Yeah, it's actually probably like a quarter. So yeah, it was a significant change in I don't know, what was that, 7 years?
Even with inflation, the camera is still cheaper because the technology's gotten cheaper. But what's funny to me is that even through all of that, the tripod we used for most of the shooting is this tripod I bought back in 2014 for like $200. I think it was $250. I bought it in Iowa City, Iowa at a photo store when I went to visit my brother. And it's just funny to me that this $250 tripod is holding up, thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment. But we made it look good. And so much of our documentary, I think, in the spirit of American Motors, was about doing more with less. We borrowed and scraped together what equipment we had, and then we made it look really good with what we had.
Absolutely. We just took little bits from here and there and just made sure we're smart about it, consistent about it, and, respectful to the people that helped us.
It did require some hard decisions. There were moments where, for instance, we decided pretty early on that we did not want drone footage. Not that we have anything against drone footage, but we kind of said, I don't know if this is going to make the storytelling any better. And neither of us at the time were licensed drone pilots. Neither of us were pirates or pilots. And so that would have meant hiring a person and, a professional drone pilot, you work in the professional video world. I mean, what's a drone pilot cost per day?
Yeah, I mean, on the low end, it's going to be 750, but that's on the super low end. And so
Right. So
then,
at least $700, if not $1,000 a day, which
yeah,
we weren't getting paid. We were doing this out of our own pockets for 3/4 of this project. We were financing it ourselves until finally we got some sponsorship toward the end. But we didn't have the money to hire $1,000 a day drone pilot. So we decided, well, we'll make do without. And I think the story is just as good.
we saw it as almost a crutch to a certain extent, where I've seen so many documentaries that just overuse kind of drone footage because there is an appeal to it. But
It's
they
beautiful.
yeah, it's just, but we were able to do the work, particularly you were able to do the work to get those archival photographs, to get the archival videos that we were more interested in showing that history of AMC rather than kind of spending extra money on, the AMC of today with those aerials. So it was I don't know. I know for sure that was my big thing. I was like, I'd rather see the car in its day rather than our day if we're going to spend money on something.
Right. We'll take the money we were going to spend on a drone pilot and instead use it to buy more historical footage, to license more historical footage. And I mean, that's what everybody tells me their favorite part of the documentary is. I mean, yeah, the footage of the cars that we shot present day is gorgeous. The interviews look cool. The people that we interviewed were nice, but everybody loves the commercials. Everybody loves the vintage TV spots, the film from inside the factory. Yeah. So, but I think that's really neat to kind of give an overview of the technical side of things. I'd say this is the first project I've worked on where when I was done, it felt like this is a real TV that a grown up made. I'm always chasing that kind of thing where I watch what's on TV and I think, how can I make that? And then I try and make something like that. And I think, it's not as good as what I saw on TV.
And the the wild part about that is you look at credits for other shows or you just look at what other shows make, and they do a great job of it, but other content has 10 times the crew, that it was a lot of it was just me and you. A lot of it was just you. A lot of it was me, you, and someone else. Like it was, the crew never exceeded 3 people that I can think of.
Right. You're right. I think the most people we ever had working at one time was 4 people. He said it was you,
Yeah.
me, Pat, and an intern. But most of the time it was you and me. It was me and Pat. It was you, me, and Alec, or you, me, and Brad, or what. Right. And it's amazing to me. I'm so proud of us that I can watch The Last Independent Automaker and think this looks like a real TV show, not something that a bunch of amateurs put together. And that's a feeling I've been chasing my whole career is watching something somebody else made and saying, how can I get to that level? How can I be as good as somebody who's already on PBS or already on, something else? And I think you helped me get there. You helped me get there. And I am super grateful for that. So, but I think it's also important to say that the technical stuff is only one side of the equation. The people we talked to are really what brings it to life, right? They're the heart. The technical stuff might be the brain, might be the body, but it's not the heart.
Yeah, no, I love the people. That's why I did it, to meet the people, preserve their history, and just make sure they have a voice throughout time.
Yeah. And so coming up in just a moment, we're going to be joined by my co-producer, Pat Foster, and Jim and I are going to talk about, our big interview session we did in Detroit, which really kicked this project off back in 2017. Specifically, how much we appreciated the help of Vince Geraci, the former AMC stylist, who let us commandeer his basement for a week so he could film there. So the three of us are going to talk about that and some of the other interesting interviews we did along the way. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Let's talk about the role that Vince played in helping us find other AMC people for this project to interview. I knew that you knew AMC people, and I said, well, Pat, can you, get on the phone, help us connect with some people? We'll take a trip to Detroit and interview these people. But talk about how important Vince was to helping convince these people to be a part of our project.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I knew a lot of the top people and in every department, but the workers, or like in Vince's case, the the interior stylists who worked for him, I only knew one or two. Of course, he knew them all. He had all their contact information. And when he called up and said, this is a legitimate project and we would really appreciate it if you could come, that made all the difference. I don't think we would have gotten half the people we got if it wasn't for Vince vouching for us.
Vince played a big part in helping us track down these people we interviewed, both through just the contact info, but then even people who knew us that were maybe on the fence, he convinced them that, oh, you should trust these guys. These guys are going to do right by this story.
He welcomed us in. He gave us kind of full reins to. He probably would have let us film anywhere in his house that we wanted to, but the basement was a nice, big, open. But it was a pretty minimal setup, that and hopefully that made people feel comfortable that they could engage with us and just kind of sit down and go.
And Vince's friend Dolly supplied the food for the entire time we were there. I mean, we were in Vince's basement for, I want to say, at least 3 days, if not 4.
Yeah.
We shot interviews from 10 in the morning to 6 in the evening, and we would try and fit 3 people in a day and do 2 hours per person or something. I mean, it was exhausting physically. It's hard on your eyes when you're running the camera, and and you get sore from sitting in a chair for too long. And then it was exhausting mentally to have to remember the questions and what we're going to ask, and then did I ask that already, or and it's just very taxing to do that. And then we had an intern, actually, another guy from Westminster, Brad Colasar, who helped Jim set up the equipment, but then also was running a scanner to scan people's photos, because people would bring their personal photographs with them from work. Lots of hard work. But I mean, I think, Pat, you said recently when we were talking to someone else, you said that, those shooting those interviews are one of the best memories of your life.
Oh yeah, those 4 days, 5 days, those were some of the best days of my life. That was so much fun. Dolly, she had snacks all the time, and she was always so cheerful and laughing, and her and Vince had that dynamic where they're always telling jokes and everything. And then afterwards, after 6 o'clock, we would do the old movie trivia questions with Vince. Vince loved old movies, and I love old movies, and it was just so much fun.
At the time, I was very tired when it was over. But now looking back, I think of how lucky I am that we got to do that. At the moment, I think I was stressed because of the gear. And does it look good? Does it sound good? I don't know. Is anybody going to watch this? Just the stress of all that. But now
Yeah.
looking back, I think that we were really lucky to have captured those stories. And then from that week at Vince's kind of established our rules for interviews, how we wanted to light, how we wanted to do sound. And so then Jim and I shot a bunch of interviews in Kenosha with factory workers at the Kenosha History Center. And then there were a few other oddball trips here and there to Detroit where we would, I was in Detroit, so I picked up an interview. Or Pat, there was a time you and I drove all the way to northern Michigan to interview Joe Cappy. We met at his country
Yeah.
club, and
It
Jim
is country club.
Jim couldn't make that trip, so Pat and I had to do that one alone. And
Yeah.
oh, what a drive! I just remember it felt like you're driving forever to get to northern Michigan. But the thing is, so many of these people we interviewed were so nice to us. Not only would they talk to us for 2 hours about their life, but Joe Cappy bought us lunch.
I was going to say, what's the first thing he said? Have you guys eaten? Let me buy you lunch.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And Dolly gave us food all the time. And then Dave Perrine, who we interviewed, gave me a jacket that I still have in my closet. Dave Perrine, Jim and I interviewed him, and he gave me this AMC racing jacket.
Wow.
And just the AMC community is full of such amazing people. They love this company. They love to talk about this company. And they loved the people they worked with. They wanted to talk about the people they worked with.
Joe, something I realized that first week in Detroit, I've interviewed a lot of people over my career, and I thought I was a pretty good interviewer. And then I listened to you interview people, and I realized I stink as an interviewer, but you are really good at it. You did this, you get, I don't know how you do it, because you just know the right questions, the right way to put them. And I was really, really impressed with that, with how you did it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It comes back to the guy I mentioned, Brad Weaver, the professor that Jim and I both had in college. I mean, he taught me a lot of stuff that I didn't know about how to talk to people for camera, how to get their stories. And here in the where Jim and I kind of grew up in the Pittsburgh region, there's a famous documentary filmmaker, a local guy named Rick Seaback, who does all these fun little PBS documentaries. And he always gets the best interviews. He always finds the funniest people. And somebody was talking about Rick and they said, "What makes him so special?" And they said, people trust him with their memories. And
Yeah.
and I have, ever since I heard that, I've always wanted to be as good as Rick Seaback. I'm not, but maybe someday. But when I look at the people we interviewed, some of the workers in Kenosha, when they kind of teared up thinking about getting laid off and losing their jobs, or
Wow.
Bob Monticelli, the designer, told me he still has dreams about working at American Motors. 30 years
Um,
later, he'll have dreams about it. And you couldn't write stuff like that. Some of these interviews these people gave.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll concur with Pat. I mean, Joe did an amazing job with the interviews, and so Joe would have great overarching outline of these questions, and he would come prepared. I mean, that was a huge part of it too. Was he was prepared, and you have to be prepared whenever you sit down to interview people, and that could be challenging sometimes because we didn't actually know who might show up. And so Joe had to have the agility to be able to adapt to that too quickly whenever people were walking in, to get an understanding of who they are, what department they were in, what questions he could ask them, how it would fit in the documentary. We did have long interviews, and sometimes I would have to try to get Joe to be like, "Look, you have to remember you're gonna have to sort through all of this and post, so you don't want it to be too long. You want to get what you want to get, but at the same time, like if you have 60 hours of footage, that's real-time footage that you kind of have to go through."
Jim was always kind of on me. Remember, every 2-hour interview you do, you're going to have to watch later. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
but one thing Jim was mentioning, Jim, you were so good at this. I would do this huge interview and I would be exhausted. And then Jim would kind of lean over and be like, "Well, kind of ask him about And Jim always had like the best final question. I remember when we were interviewing Mitt Romney, we only had like 30 minutes and Pat and I are kind of going back and forth, each of us asking one question. Next question was like, it was like a boom, 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 boom. And Mitt Romney was so good at answering questions. And then I was almost done and Jim kind of asked, he's like, "Ask him what was America like in the 1960s? What was our relationship to cars?" And it was like the perfect question.
Mm.
And I asked him that, and Mitt, being an excellent interviewee, immediately knew what Jim was trying to get at and just launched into this great little anecdote where he's like, "It was a different time in America. We loved our cars, we loved our country."
It was an interesting time, the 50s and 60s. One, we were under threat from Khrushchev, who claimed he would bury us. And perhaps in responding to that, we were very family-oriented, and we liked our cars. It was a strange thing. In a way that I don't think most young people can appreciate today. Your car was a defining feature. People bought cars like every other year, because each 2 years the car companies changed what the cars looked like. Not American Motors, they couldn't afford that, but many car companies changed them pretty dramatically every 2 years. And what kind of car you drove said something about you. Cars were a big part of American society and who we were. And the movies that you see from that era always featured fast cars and drag races. It was just part of American culture. It was a good time to be raised in America.
Great soundbite, all because of Jim thinking to ask that question, which I would have never thought of.
Yeah, Mitt's whole team was lovely. Like they welcomed us in. They actually said, this is kind of normally where we film him, but you can kind of do whatever you want. And oh, what cameras are you using? And what this and that? What kind of light is that? Like, oh, that's a battery powered light, and it's like very small for being battery powered light. And this was 5 years ago, and that has all changed. And but they
were cool.
Yeah, they were very cool. Like, and they were on time. They gave us the exact amount of time that they promised us, and Mitt answered every question that he promised he would answer. Especially in the realm of a public figure, somebody that you might not expect to be on time, to be as reliable. He was 100% spot on and made it easy for us. Really did.
I don't know about you guys, but I thought it was so exciting when his aide met us outside the Senate office building and walked us through security and then literally down the halls of power. And I'm looking at the doors of all these different senators and I think, wow, we're inside the seat of government and we're going to a senator's office. It was really exciting. I mean, I've known Mitt for years and years, but mostly on a social basis. I would meet with his father over his house to do interviews and things like that. Um, Mitt and his wife would welcome me into the house and then kind of disappear, leave me with his father for the interviews. And to see him in his office, that was really exciting for me.
Yeah, so grateful for, from all the figures, big and small, who made it into the documentary. Every one of
Yeah.
them played an important role in the story.
One more just anecdote about the shoot at Vince's house. For me, I was working full time during this, and so I always had deadlines. And so in between, whenever we were doing interviews, I was over there editing a Kickstarter video for a female entrepreneur that was about to launch in 3 weeks. And Vince was so curious about that. Vince would come over all the time and ask me questions and want to know what I was doing and how I did it and why I did it. And it was just so fun to get to know him and his curiosity too. Like, and
Yeah.
that it just really stuck out to me that, and for me, whenever Pat said that shoot at Vince's house, that first shoot was one of the best weeks of his life, like, it didn't even like, we were so busy, Joe and I were just so busy and all of us were busy, but like to sit back and reflect on that, to understand the importance on our lives, on the project, I think it really means something special. I think that we got to spend that time with Vince and all of those people was just really
Yeah.
special to
Yep.
us all.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, we're very lucky. It's hard to think that Vince is gone, a person who played such a big role, in my life, my career. I'm sure Pat will say the same.
Oh yeah.
I've told this story 100 times, but the documentary took longer to finish than we thought it would. And there were a lot of times in those middle years, 2019, 2020, 2021, where it felt like we were never going to finish it. It was just going to always sit on a shelf and never get done. And, Vince and I used to call back and forth, and, sometimes he would call me and, he'd answer the phone. He'd go, "Oh, is this Joe? Is this Joe Ligo, the famous filmmaker, the big star documentary maker? Oh, what an honor," and, and, he'd pull my leg and stuff. And, that was a big reason why we finished this project, why I kind of pulled out all the stops to get this thing done, is because I thought we have to finish this for Vince. If for
Yeah.
nobody else,
Yeah.
we have to finish this for Vince because of how
Yeah.
much he helped us. And I'm really proud to say that we finished it and we sent all 6 episodes to Vince and he got to watch all 6 episodes before he passed away.
Yeah.
And I have an email from him. It's just a couple sentences, but it tells me how much the program meant to him. I'll always treasure that, knowing that he got to see the final product once it was
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
What a great guy, and him and so many of the other people we interviewed too.
American Motors is unique, never to be replicated again. That's a one-timer.
Listening to all these stories and all these memories from the last almost 10 years since we first started this project, it just reminds me of how lucky we are, how blessed we are to have so many people like Vince who helped us do this project. And of course, we're lucky to have viewers like you too, because without your views, without your donations, without your support and your shares, this project wouldn't be able to be done either. So I want to thank you all for watching. Of course, if you haven't watched our documentary, you can check it all out for free right now on YouTube. If you've already watched it, go back and check it out again. Maybe you'll see something new now that you've heard the behind the scenes stories. In the meantime, stay tuned because we'll have more podcasts coming your way. Thanks again for watching.
The last Independent Automaker podcast was sponsored in part by Visit Detroit, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Motor City's National Heritage Area, and by the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to this project. Thank you.